It is such a pleasure for me and the World Affairs Council to host Brent Cagle today, a person that doesn't need introduction, but I will introduce him to you with his bio. It's a person that we all interact with through our travel at the airport and all the good things, the developments, the building of the new part of the airport. In many ways, are thanks to all the work, the great work that Brent is doing. Today we'll have a program on pandemics in the sky, a very important topic. What will happen with travel? What will happen with the airline carriers? What are the effects of COVID-19, the global pandemic, on us here in Charlotte region, nationally and globally? So allow me to share with you that Brent Cagle is the Aviation Director for the city's Aviation Department, which owns and operates the Charlotte Douglas International Airport. He joined the department in 2012. Prior to his current position, Cagle served as Assistant Aviation Director, Administration and Finance for the Aviation Department. In that position, he oversaw the department's accounting functions as well as development and management of its annual operating budget. Cagle works closely with the Aviation Department signatory airlines in the development and management of its airline signatory carriers' annual fees and charges, budget, and settlement. He has more than 20 years of experience in municipal government and over a decade of aviation experience. Throughout the years, he has served in various financial and aviation roles. Brent began his career in Waco, Texas as a research analyst with the Economic Development Department and later moved into the management of contracts. In 2000, he joined the City of Phoenix Auditor Department, where he held various management roles in the budget office and in neighborhood services. In 2007, he joined the City of Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport, where he held the position of Deputy Aviation Director. While there, he oversaw the Financial Management Division, which was responsible for the comprehensive annual financial report, a $200 million annual operating budget and capital budget. Brent also has experience in preparation of offering statements related to issuance of airport revenue bonds. Brent holds a Master of Public Administration from Texas Tech University and completed his undergraduate work at Baylor University. So once again, I want to welcome you here, Brent. It is I know, a very busy time for you. And finding this time to talk to us, to our members in the community, is really very much appreciated. So before I turn it to you, would you share with us, how are you spending your time? How are you and your family spending your time during these times of the new normal that we're all experiencing?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm sure with, like a lot of folks who are now learning a lot of new technologies, WebEx and Zoom and all of that, we've really been at home most of the time. I usually go into the office once a day or so, but most of our administrative staff are teleworking now. So I get to spend a lot more time trying to figure out where I can do WebEx calls and that kind of thing from home, and I'm not going to be hear the dog barking or have my 16-year-old interrupting the call. So let's hope, I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that's not the case today. So I think I'm safe. But it has been a very interesting time. It's something that we could not have, I don't think anyone could have anticipated, but it has fundamentally changed, at least for the last 6 weeks, how the airport has operated.
Thank you so much. So we do encourage questions for Brent Cagle. Please use the question and answer function, and your questions will be read, and Brent will be happy to answer at the end of the program as we start. Now, Brent, it's all yours. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm going to take just a minute to pull up the presentation, so bear with me real quick while I start to share the screen. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see the screen. So as LJ said, I'm the Aviation Director at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. Really, starting in March, we started to see the impacts from COVID-19 So we're on a July through June fiscal year. And the interesting thing is this fiscal year is going to be 3 quarters of amazing growth and prosperity, followed by the last quarter of actual, just absolute, almost complete drop off, 95% drop off in passenger traffic. So a little bit, so this slide shows really where we were at for fiscal year 19, and then shows where we were looking at for estimated the current fiscal year 20, and what our outlook is going forward into fiscal year 21. So another thing to note, and if I give any acronyms or aviation lingo, I apologize. I will try not to do that, but if I do that, someone just ask a question and ask me to explain what the lingo is. So a couple things to note about this. A lot of times you will hear airport folks talk about enplaned passengers or total passengers. And basically speaking, an enplaned passenger number is half of a total passenger number. So you might recall Charlotte Douglas before COVID-19 celebrated breaking the 50 million annual passenger mark. We did that in December, looking at calendar year basis. That's a total passenger number. So 50 million total passengers is roughly 25 million enplaned passengers. These charts are generally speaking going to be in enplaned passengers. So that's roughly half of the total passengers. So you can see we have seen fiscal year 19 ended at just under 24 million passengers. And for fiscal year 20, we had estimated about 24.2 million annual passengers. That estimate pre-COVID-19 was actually proving to be a little bit short. We were looking at more like 25 million annual passengers. The FY20 estimated column really goes into where we think we're going to finish the year after COVID-19. And so you can see it's about a 5 million annual passenger decline from FY19 at about 18.778 million passengers. So as we were preparing for fiscal year 21, again, starting fiscal year 21 in July, we were looking ahead. We had actually almost completed our fiscal year 21 budget before COVID-19 hit. And we were expecting about 26.1 million annual enplanements. We have now revised that down to 18.5 million annual enplanements, or about a 24% decline. Now you'll also note the next row is our landed weight. The landed weight has decreased significantly. It's off by about, or projected to be off by about 16.5%, but it's still, it hasn't reduced as much as the enplanements. And what that's really reflective of is the airlines continuing to fly routes. And even though they've pulled down the number of flights, it hasn't been as much as the number of, or the size of the decline in the passengers. So basically right now, we are still seeing hundreds of flights daily coming and going. It's just most of those airplanes are, for all intents and purposes, generally speaking, empty. So right now, and this trend has been holding steady for about the last 3 weeks, we are at about, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to move my slide there. We are at about a 90 to 95% reduction in daily traffic or enplaned passenger levels. That is a significant reduction, and that's been that's about the level we've been at for about the last 4 weeks or so. We're starting to see numbers improve very, very slowly, but over the last week to 10 days, we have seen a little bit of improvements in the numbers, but they're very small. What we're really projecting is the beginning of a recovery in August, and I'll get to that, the recovery and our projections here in a couple slides. So a couple things about the airport. The Aviation Department, owned and operated by the City of Charlotte, but we are an enterprise fund, so we receive no taxpayer proceeds. So property taxes, local sales taxes, those kinds of things do not go to support the operations or capital projects at the airport. What does pay for airport expenses are the airport revenues. And we derive our revenues in two basic ways. One is from the airlines. So we charge the airlines based on their use of the facilities and services. And the other is through the non-airline revenues. And these are primarily airport parking and terminal concessionaires. And an oddity about airports in the United States is under federal guidelines, airline revenues are equal to airline expenses. And what I mean by that is airports are only allowed to charge airlines the cost of the services and facilities that they use. So there are no net revenues associated with airline billings. It is all on a cost basis. That is not true for non-airline revenues. So the terminal concessionaires, parking, all of that operates with the intention of turning a profit, and those profits are then reinvested back into the airport and kept at the airport to sustain our bond rating, to allow us to issue debt for capital projects, and to pay for operations and maintenance. So again, this is about what you would expect. The airline revenues are diminished, but not nearly as much as the non-airline revenues. So we went from a non-airline revenue budget for the current year of approximately, we were anticipating 154.7 million in total non-airline revenues. We have revised that for the current fiscal year down to 120.7 million. So basically a loss of about $34 million. For FY21, again, we were anticipating or projecting about 165.8 million in non-airline revenues, and we have again revised that down to be flat with the current year. So really for next year, we're projecting about a $45 million loss or diminishment of non-airline revenues. That is very significant for us. Those are the kinds of things that we've spent the last 3 to 4 weeks trying to solve for when we look at our financial projections and make sure that we can cover our O&M and debt service payments. So employment activity. This basically shows you, this is indexed from 2019, and it shows you basically what happened in April of this year. And it's basically a complete loss of emplaned passengers. It also shows you what we project. This is our base case scenario. So it's not, this is basically our middle ground scenario. We also have a worst case scenario that is not as strong as this one, but this is what we're using right now when we start talking about projections for recovery. So you can see right now, in April, May, June, July, we continue to have little to no emplaned passenger activity. Then we start to see a recovery in August, and that recovery is fairly robust. And it brings us back to about 90% of prior years' traffic activity by January of 2021. And we hold steady at about 90% through the rest of the fiscal year, so through June. What we're really saying here is right now we think that there will be sort of pent-up demand, and there will be a pretty quick recovery in the short run, but then we get to a new normal, and that new normal is about 90% of where we were previous years, and that new normal is achieved at about January of 2021. Beyond January of 2021, all growth coming is just normal growth associated with general economic conditions in the country and in the world, and regional demand. And so what we're really saying is we get back to about 90%, and then that becomes, in effect, the new normal. Now, when you combine all of the months in fiscal year 2021, what we see is on the year, we get back to about 70 to 75% of prior year's traffic levels. And that's the combination of the recovery months and then the new normal at 90%. Now, as I said, this is our base case. It is not our worst case scenario. So this shows, again, the increases, the original versus the current or the base case versus the slow recovery. And you can see the original is where we thought we'd be if COVID-19 had not happened. And so the current is that base case, again, getting back to about 90% in January of 21. The slow recovery is the bottom line. And what the slow recovery forecasts is that we have the same recovery after about August, but it's not as strong. It really gets us to about 50% of prior year's traffic levels by January of 2021. And then 50% of traffic levels becomes the new normal, and it continues on from January 2021 going forward. And again, growth beyond that would just be normal growth associated with economic conditions. And so right now, we are not utilizing the slow or the worst case scenario, the slow recovery, but we are closely monitoring the recovery, and we may start to alter our base case scenario down or up, depending on what happens in the next 3, 4, 5 months. So the travel industry forecast, I wanted to show, so a lot of times when I show that base case scenario, people say that seems a little bit optimistic. And it is a little bit optimistic. But the reason we chose that is we took a look at JP Morgan, and we took a look at Fitch Rating Agency, and they have some general travel industry forecasts that are out there and publicly available. These forecasts are not specific to Charlotte, but you can see we basically fall right in between the two forecasts. Now, again, those forecasts and our forecasts may change as we start to see what happens into June, July, August, September. But we just don't know right now. So what are our priorities? One is sustaining our airport operations. The airfield, the terminal must remain open. There are, even though we are at significantly reduced numbers of traffic, there are still 10 to 15,000 people daily using the airport, and those folks are traveling because they have to. Medical, military, you know, those kinds of things. There's also cargo and general aviation. So all of those users expect and require the airfield and the terminal to be open and operational. So that's our top priority. The second, we are receiving some CARES Act funding. And as part of that, the second priority will be protecting aviation department employees. So if you work for the aviation department, your job is safe. We plan no layoffs or terminations, reductions in force as a result of COVID-19. Commitment to investors. We have about $800 million outstanding of general airport revenue bonds. We've made a commitment to those investors, to those bondholders, and we will comply with those obligations and protect their investment. And then the last is to support our business partners. These are the airlines, the concessionaires, trying to find ways to create financial relief and flexibility so that when the recovery comes, we're all ready to resume normal operations or as close to normal operations as we can. The CARES Act funding. So Congress passed in the third round of CARES Act $10 billion of funding specific to airports. This is separate and apart from CARES Act funding for airlines. Airports received collectively $10 billion. Of that, CLT is receiving $135 million. They can be used for any lawful airport expense, and we have already started to identify uses for our funding. The first is we will pay our fiscal year 2021 annual debt service payment of just under $30 million out of CARES Act funding. The second is passenger facility charges, or PFCs. Those are a user-based charge, and so the airport collects passenger facility charges based on each passenger that goes through the airport. Since there are far fewer passengers, there is far less PFCs collected. So what do we do with the PFCs? We have some debt, outstanding debt that is backed by the PFC collections, and we also have existing pay-as-you-go capital projects that are underway that are being funded with PFCs. So second priority for the CARES Act is to basically augment the PFC collections since they have been significantly declined or reduced. In fiscal year 2021, we will also look at utilizing CARES Act funding to help us offset some of the additional costs associated with COVID-19 and for making changes to operations or facility as needed as we start to understand what passenger expectations are when they go to travel in, I guess, what I'm going to call a COVID-19 world. So we have to really kind of think about what are passenger expectations going to be as they travel. What do they need to feel safe and to be safe as they travel in a COVID-19 world? And there will be some costs associated with that. So the third area is for helping us with our operations and maintenance expenses. And then on the last area, and I don't know if we'll make it to this fourth bucket, is are there some projects that would make sense to do now while we have diminished passenger traffic? Could we use some CARES Act funding to bring those capital projects forward? Right now, we're not looking at that, but as we understand the recovery, we might start to look at those uses more. So our Proforma, as I said, we are part of the city of Charlotte, but we are a separate credit entity from the main city of Charlotte tax-supported bonds. So when we issue bonds, they are not backed by city of Charlotte taxes. That's why you never see our bond issuances on a bond referendum like you would a general obligation bond. Because of that, we carry our own credit rating. We are a AA rated airport, which is the highest credit rating for airports in the US. So as part of that, maintaining that credit rating and making sure that we meet our metrics, we have some core financial metrics that basically the rating agencies and investors look at. Days cash on hand, our debt per emplaned passenger, our debt service coverage. All of these things are things that we have established management targets on and that we annually publish in our annual financial report. I will say the targets are not set in stone. They do change. The targets right now are based on rating agencies, what they view as the medians for similarly rated airports. So for other AA rated airports, what are the medians in these on these performance indicators? So that's where those come from, the targets come from, and they do change over time. So you can see as an example, the top metric, days cash on hand. The management target is 800 days. That is really the median for a AA rated airport. Charlotte has always done very, very well when it comes to liquidity. We have always been an airport that maintains strong liquidity. So as you see, again, our metrics reflect that. Now, the other thing I'll say about metrics, you should really kind of look at this chart as a stoplight chart, kind of green being we meet or exceed the metric, yellow being we're plus or minus 1 or 2% of the metric, red being we are below or above depending on the metric. We're outside of the target. It's not particularly concerning, especially in the out years, to have 1 or 2 red metrics. What that really means is as we work through our planning over the next 5 years, we know where we need to focus our planning efforts and start to right size either our operating expenses, our capital program, all of those different things. So 1 or 2 red or yellow boxes is not concerning. What you want to see is green in general. What you never want to see is sort of a red chart across the board. And so again, we feel very good about where we stand on our primary targets. And again, these metrics do change, the targets change, and then the metrics can change if our recovery, all of this is based on the base case recovery scenario. So these metrics can change or will change if the worst case or if we recover slower than we think. With that, I wanted to move through that fairly quickly to leave time for questions. With that, I will turn it over for questions, and I will turn off the stop sharing. There we go.
Thank you, Brent. We'll start with questions now. Jesse, go ahead.
All right. Okay, so I will go straight from the top on these questions. I don't know what order they came in, but I'm going to start with the top here. So Mary asked, does the airline weight include all of the cargo flights? Yes. So landed weight includes all aircraft landing, whether they be cargo, passenger, general aviation, military. Landed weight includes all of the landed weight or all of the aircraft that land at the airport. Okay, second question. Won't the losses be much higher for 2021 since the entire fiscal year will be affected? Yes, and that's why it is crucial for us to utilize the stimulus funding, the CARES Act funding. That will really help us shore up our operating expenses while we go through the recovery period. And that is going to be very, very important for us. It's why those CARES Act money is so important, and it's why why Congress made it available specifically to airports. Okay, do you really think there will be a new normal prior to a vaccine being readily available? Yes. I don't know what that normal is going to look like. I will say this is an interesting time. Probably, if you were watching the news over the last week or so, we actually started to see relatively full flights from New York to Charlotte again. Now, there was concern about that, and the airlines are now starting to change their operating procedures to address that with social distancing and those kinds of things. But yeah, we do think that there will be sort of pent-up demand and people will start to travel again. We don't know how many people will start to travel again, and that's why we have the two different scenarios. The other thing we don't know is if we'll get a bit of a rebound, and then if COVID-19 reemerges, let's say it dies down in the summer, reemerges in the fall, if then we might get back into stay-at-home orders and a reduction back to zero. All of those things are possible, but we just don't know because it's such a dynamic situation. The other thing we don't know is if we actually see a vaccine come out in January, what that will do to the tail end of fiscal year 2021. So all of those things are kind of out there and floating around, and we just don't know. Okay, next question. Has the ongoing construction projects been impacted by COVID-19? So yes and no. The terminal lobby expansion has not been impacted. It is continuing to move forward. The C concourse renovation has not been impacted and is continuing to move forward. We had a couple projects that were had not started construction, and we have deferred those. The biggest of those is the A concourse phase 2 expansion. So A concourse phase 2 would have been creating another concourse similar to the newest A concourse expansion, which was phase 1. That project has not been canceled, but it has been deferred. At this point, we're anticipating 3 to 6 months, but it could be longer than that, depending on, it all depends on the strength or weakness of the recovery. Are likely changes in behaviors going to impact traditional catchment area and area leakage thinking and measures in the near and or long term? Could this potentially strengthen the relative competitive position of CLT? That is an excellent question. And I think that, well, I'm going to give you my opinion. Yes, I think that behaviors are going to be changed. And I think that it will have an impact for our catchment area. And I also think that Charlotte is poised to do well in the recovery, whatever that recovery looks like. Typically speaking, so, you know, a lot of times people will say, you know, what's the benefit beyond all those flights that American brings of being a primary hub? Historically, so one of those benefits is right now in the downturns, in the crisis. Historically, CLT has fared much better than other airports across the country in economic crisis or downturns in 2 ways. One, we see less of a dip in or reduction in service during the crisis, and we also tend to see a quicker recovery than the rest of the nation. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but being a primary hub to American helps us with that. And what helps American choose to continue doing business in Charlotte is our low cost to the airlines. We have an extraordinarily low cost when it comes to airlines. For the charges that we have for airlines to use the facility, we are by far the lowest cost airport in the country. And we will maintain that position throughout the crisis. That was one of the things that we were very, very keenly aware of as we right-sized our budget and as we start to look at how we use stimulus funds, is maintaining that competitive advantage. So yes, I do think that we will we will have a stronger relative advantage compared to the competition. And in fact, American Airlines has already talked about this. The 2 hubs that they are really focused on in recovery first will be DFW and CLT. So we think that's good for us and good for the region. Okay, assuming that airlines will not be able to sell all seats on their aircraft because of social distancing, what is the outlook for airline pricing? So I think that there's a couple things in that. One is, I'm not sure if that assumption is actually going to be true or not. If long term they won't be able to sell the middle seat, for example. There have been a couple airline CEOs who have sort of laughed at that idea and said, you know, whether or not we're selling the middle seat or not, without the middle seat, you're 18 inches farther away from somebody else than with the middle seat. It's a little bit, I don't know what's going to happen with that. So, but if the middle seat becomes the empty seat, the COVID-19 seat. This is just my opinion because I do not work for an airline. I would suspect that that is not good news when it comes to ticket pricing for airlines and for revenue projections for airlines. But again, I'm not sure if that assumption will hold true long-term or not. What are the prospects for the resumption of nonstop services from Charlotte to Europe? That is a good question. I think right now it's unknown. Right now, LJ and I were just talking about this. Right now, with all of the different travel restrictions in place, country by country, it really highlights why it's so important to have as few restrictions as possible when you're trying to travel internationally. It makes it very, very difficult logistically to travel to and from or to travel internationally abroad when all these different countries, the US included, have all of these sort of patchwork of different travel restrictions. So right now, with demand low and with the different travel restrictions in place, I think that we're seeing the results of that. Very little to no international traffic. What happens as we start to recover? I think it's still too early to tell. Why do you have such a significant jump in airline cost per enplaned passengers between 2023 and 2025? So one thing on that is, the reason is in the modeling, we have significant capital expenses and debt service that's coming online associated with those capital expenses. What I will say is, when I was going through that slide, I said, you know, you kind of look at the problem areas, especially when they're out in the outer years, and you start to solve for those as you get closer to them. The 2025 cost per enplanement is something that we will absolutely be working to solve. 550 is not a terrible cost per enplanement. That is still actually very, very competitive. And by the time we get to 2025, a 550 CPE will still be the lowest in the industry. But for Charlotte, it is a significant jump, and so we'll be working through that as we get closer to 2025. What basis did you use for the 90% return projection? I think what that means is, was it the 50 million? Basically, the basis was fiscal year 2019. So it would be a return of 90% on a monthly basis from fiscal year 2019. What measures does the airport plan to implement to protect passengers, especially in the security areas, once the airport opens back up? So one thing that we are looking at right now are what passenger expectations are. And we are working on that internally with all of our stakeholders, the TSA, the airlines, the concessionaires, everybody who works at the airport. We're looking at what that recovery looks like. We actually are calling it the recovery team, the COVID-19 recovery team, and they're looking at these kinds of things right now. Maybe distributing a mask. It may be more of what we're already doing, more frequent cleaning, hand sanitizers, social distancing by removing seats in the concession areas or even the hold rooms. We're looking at that right now, and we are trying to make the determination with our partners what the airport experience looks like moving forward. Can I give recovery figures separately for domestic and international? Oh, I'm sorry, I can, yes. So right now we assume international will be slower recovery than domestic. I would need to consult with my planning team to get into the weeds, but we are assuming that international recovery is slower than domestic. Beyond that, I can work with LJ to get him some more information on the two forecasts. Could the terminal lobby expansion project timeline be accelerated due to fewer number of passengers going through the terminal? That is an excellent question, and it's one that we immediately started asking. And the answer to that is because the terminal lobby expansion has so many different phases, all of those phases are lined up, and all of the materials and specific contractors associated with those phases are already lined up and scheduled. And so the answer is, generally speaking, no. And it's because we'd have to redo all of the phasing and the planning associated with that phasing. Now, there are some advantages. And so what we think is we're less likely to take delays associated with, heavy passenger traffic or those kinds of things. The interesting thing, on top of the terminal lobby expansion, we asked that question for the C concourse renovation. And the interesting thing is American is still basically using the C concourse all day long. So what we haven't seen is any of our airlines actually totally give back, American Airlines has not totally given back any of their gates. What they have done is shortened their days. So instead of the operation starting at 5:30, 6 a.m. and running till 11 p.m., now it's starting more like 8 a.m. and running till 9 p.m. So what that does for our construction contractor is give them more hours to work, but they don't actually get to just have free reign on the concourse because there are still people utilizing it. Okay, American has announced resumption of service to Heathrow and Munich on July 7th. Okay, I think that was just a comment. That was a comment from Tracy. So it looks like American has announced the resumption of service, Tracy Montross, to Heathrow and Munich on July 7th. Okay, what are the airport priorities that will help drive the future growth of our airport, especially given that we remain the only second-tier city with a major hub? That is an interesting question. We're a great city. I wouldn't call it second tier, but Charlotte's awesome. But we are definitely, the size of the airport is out of whack with the size of the city. The airport is bigger than the city would normally support. So what are our priorities? Meeting airline demand, whatever the new normal is, whatever the recovery is, the airlines are still going to rely on us to provide a consistent, reliable operating platform. We think about the airfield and the terminal as an operating platform that the airlines use to move people and goods. And so they're still going to look to us to provide that consistency in providing the platform. The other thing that they're always going to look to us to do is provide that consistency at a very competitive price. That has been something that's been important at CLT for decades, and I do not anticipate it changing. We need to be efficient and we need to be cost effective, and so we will continue focusing on that. Are the CARES Act funds being used to tear down the old warehouses off West Boulevard, and what will go into that space? And that's from Wayne Cooper. So Wayne, no, they are not being used to tear down the old warehouses off of West, but we are tearing down those warehouses. We don't know what's going to go into that space yet. If you have any ideas or suggestions, I'd be happy to talk to you about that offline. But we are tearing them down. They've become obsolete and are, generally speaking, in bad shape, so we're tearing them down now. When looking at projections, we sometimes fall back on existing business models. Is it possible that airline and airport business models might change significantly as a result of this crisis? What might be the implications for what we all acknowledge as the economic engine for our region? That is a very good question. Yes, it is. Yes, we all have a tendency to say, once this crisis is over, it's going to go back to how it was. That may be true, but it may not. What we are looking at now is what would it look like? What is the new normal? We may see diminished passenger levels for years to come. And even as passenger recovery starts to move forward, that recovery, we may get to that new normal and plateau there, and then it just becomes normal growth. We're looking at all of that now. What we're really trying to think about from a passenger experience standpoint, what does it mean for concessions? If you own a concession at the airport that has a large dining area, a sit-down dining area, what does it mean in COVID-19? Are people ever going to feel comfortable sitting down shoulder to shoulder in a crowded restaurant and sitting there for an hour while they wait on their flight? I don't know. But those are the kinds of things that we're looking at now. We're also looking at some basic things. Someone mentioned security checkpoint lines. Again, what does the new security checkpoint look like in the era, in the age of social distancing and 6 feet apart? But that's also, when you go to check in for your flight, or you go to board a flight, those are the things that the airport, the airlines, the concessionaires, we're all looking at those things now. And it is certain that the design, how people use the airport will change, because their expectation is going to change. Now, when it comes to economic engine, airports will always play a major role in the movement of people and goods. And so from that standpoint, we are always going to be an employment center, and we're going to be a source of economic impact in the region. And as the largest airport in the Carolinas, we will, right now we believe we'll retain that position. And that's predominantly, as I said before, that is it helps to be a primary hub to American Airlines. Okay, what part of CLT flights are transatlantic flights? That is a deep in the weeds question that I don't want to answer because I don't know the exact answer, but I will get that information to LJ. It's a small portion, but I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. Okay, I saw Dulles International this past weekend with large aircraft parked on taxiways and reports of base closures for certain aircraft. What are you hearing about local American airline employment? I guess what I would say is American, as we talk to them, they are committed to Charlotte, but we're all trying to work our way through this. And so I'll reserve, I don't want to answer that on American's behalf, but I think Tracy Montross might be actually listening in, so maybe she can help throw me a lifeline on that one. Okay, what level of screening for COVID-19 do you anticipate will be the responsibility of CLT? That's a good question. We don't know. And we also don't know what COVID-19 screening means. What does it look like? And so we're talking about that right now. Should we be checking temperatures for local passengers? Should we be checking temperatures for connecting passengers? This raises so many questions. So, we've had a lot of conversations about, so if we were to start, so as a connecting hub, which Charlotte is, 70% of our traffic pre-COVID-19 were connecting passengers. If we start checking temperatures, for example, randomly inside the terminal on a connecting passenger, what do you do? What do you do if they show up at Charlotte and they're from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they're on their way to New York City and they have 100.4 temperature? I mean, I don't have a legal mechanism to hold them. So there are lots of sort of operational and legal. I mean, this even gets into our basic civil liberties as citizens of the United States. It's a great question. I wish I had a better answer right now, but I don't. These are the kind of things that we're looking at right now. and trying to figure it out. What I will say is, I know that some airports and local, some cities and even states are talking about, what are the requirements going to be to fly or to travel in COVID-19. What I hope is that whatever that looks like, whatever that new normal is, the roles and responsibilities, I hope are uniform across the country, and that the FAA or the federal government has a chance to weigh in on that to keep things uniform. Because again, with patchwork of different requirements, it becomes logistically difficult to move people and goods if every place you land has sort of different expectations and requirements associated with COVID-19. So I don't know what the requirements will look like. I hope that they're at least uniform and consistent, at least across the United States. If CLT is low cost to the airlines, why is that not passed on to passengers? Passenger tickets are more expensive out of CLT. That is a good question. The reason is because the way airports charge airlines is regulated by the federal government and is based on cost. The way airlines charge passengers is based on supply and demand, and it's not regulated by the federal government. In fact, governments cannot regulate it. It's the Deregulation Act from the 70s. So airlines set their ticket pricing based on a lot of factors, but it comes down to what is the passenger willing to pay. And if they're willing to buy a ticket, then American and all the airlines are willing to sell it at whatever the price is. So it's a very different rate setting methodology. Airports to airlines is all cost and only cost, and that's by federal mandate. And airlines, as they sell tickets to passengers, they don't have the same requirement. Have you already identified reentry plans for your employees and stakeholders? Are you at liberty to share them now? We are working on that right now. When you say reentry plans, I assume you mean like pulling folks back into the office who are teleworking. We have a significant number of employees working every day at the airport and have since the beginning of this in our operations and facilities groups. So those folks right now, what they're doing is they're working on a staggered staffing model. And what that's designed to do is have 3 different shifts, an A, B, and a C shift. And it goes down to minimum staffing levels, and it tries to keep each of the shifts separate from the others, so that if one person on the A shift, for example, gets sick, and that means that 5 other people then have to self-isolate for 7 or 14 days, we have reserve staff who can come in and backfill. So we're already doing that for the essential staff who cannot telework. For the teleworking staff, generally speaking, the administrative staff are all teleworking and have been since the start of this. For those folks, we are looking right now at what we would do to phase them back into the office. But quite frankly, we probably won't get back to how it was. There will be some staff who, by virtue of doing it for the last 6 weeks, have proven that they can basically do 95%, if not 100% of their jobs teleworking. For those staff, they'll be allowed to continue doing that. And so it'll be a phased approach to bring them back. We'll also be working to make adjustments to our cubicles, to our staff areas, our break rooms, to allow better ease of social distancing. But we're working through all of that right now. What I would say is, even if the current stay-at-home order changes later this week or next week, the staff that we have that are teleworking will continue to telework for some period into the future as we work through all of these details. Has there been discussion of needing to do COVID-19 testing on-site at the airport, either pre-boarding or upon arrival? This has been a consideration for some. I think I touched on that a little bit earlier. Okay, if City Council imposes a higher minimum wage, how will that impact CLT viability as a reasonably priced hub? All right, so that is a good question. So the city of Charlotte has a living wage requirement for all Charlotte employees, and it's $16 an hour. So all of the folks who work for the aviation department make no less than $16 an hour. Under state law, as a governmental entity today, a tenant, I cannot I cannot mandate employment practices on any of my tenants or contractors, and that's under state law. So, so again, it's kind of because of state law, I don't know if council actually can mandate a minimum wage other than the federal minimum wage, or what the state supports today. But under state law, I can't mandate. So an example is, even if I thought that every concessionaire at the airport should pay their employees $16 an hour and have full benefits, I can't mandate that as part of their lease. They can lease the facility, and I do not have a legal right to mandate their employment practices. And Tracy says, tune in tomorrow at 10 a.m. for the city's Community Recovery Task Force for a presentation from American Airlines executives. I think we made it through every question, surprisingly enough. I was going fast, so if there are more, please let me know. But I think we made it through there.
Brent, thank you so very much. Flying the pandemic skies. Brent Cagle, thank you for offering your very informative perspective on the impact on the airline industry and Charlotte Douglas Airport of COVID-19. We had a ton of questions here. Let me just share with you all before you leave that actually my colleague Charlotte Klopp has put in the chat area the Charlotte Douglas International Airport video called "We Will Be Here When the World Reopens" that Brent mentioned. So you can click on it and download it and watch it. I'm sure that it will be very informative. So again, you have it in the chat area. You just need to double click on it and you'll be able to access the video that was mentioned by Brent. Brent, this was, as I said, a very needed conversation. You answered so many questions and in great detail. I'm delighted that, again, you found time to share this with us. I think you're doing a great job at the airport. We look forward to flying at and from Charlotte Douglas as soon as possible. We hope that solutions will be found. We hope that a vaccine will be available sooner than later, and that the world will turn to a new normal, but a little bit better new normal that we are at this point of time. Thank you all for participating. There will be a video of this event provided to all of you, other organizations and educational institutions around Charlotte and the region. I want to use this opportunity to thank the World Affairs Councils of America and the World Council of Connecticut for participating with us today. All those people from around the country who have logged in today and participated in this Seas to Seas project that we had with the World Affairs Councils of America. Thank you, Brent Cagle. Thank you all for participating. We'll see you on Thursday. Bye-bye.
Thank you.